Everyone keeps telling you this is strictly a story about chips. Who owns the most GPUs, who trains the biggest model, who wins the leaderboard this month. That story isn't wrong, it's just half the equation. Here's the sentence that should make you sit up a little straighter. America isn't just racing China to build the smartest chatbot, it's racing China to keep the lights on. While Washington focuses heavily on silicon, China is quietly solving the physical bottleneck every AI model, no matter how brilliant, cannot run without. And the way this race actually gets decided won't just depend on raw intelligence, it depends equally on something as old and as simple as electricity. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your power bill, your job, and the next decade of American strength are all tied to the exact same wire. Let's break down what nobody in Silicon Valley wants to say out loud.
Let's start with the story you already know, because you've heard some version of it, whether you follow this stuff closely or not. The story goes like this. America builds the smartest AI in the world. OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, xAI, 4 companies, all racing each other, all racing the calendar, all trying to release the next model before the other guy does. Behind every one of those companies sits Nvidia. Nvidia doesn't make the chatbots, Nvidia makes the engine underneath them, the GPUs, the chips that do the actual thinking, the hardware that turns electricity and data into something that can write your email, debug your code, or hold a conversation that feels almost human. And for years, the plan in Washington was simple. If chips are the oil of the AI era, then control the oil. Back in 2022, the US government started restricting exactly which chips Nvidia could sell to China. Not a full ban at first, a ceiling, a line drawn in the silicon saying you can have this much computing power and not one GPU more. The thinking was straightforward. If China can't get the best chips, China can't build the best AI. Simple as that. And for a while, it looked like it was working. Meanwhile, the money pouring into this race is almost impossible to picture. Estimates put America's total AI investment somewhere north of $700 billion this year alone. China's spending is smaller, closer to $200 billion over the past decade, but it's aimed with a precision that makes every dollar count differently. And at the start of this year, China's president stood in front of the country and basically took a victory lap. He talked about a wave of homegrown AI models competing to be the best in the world. He talked about breakthroughs in domestic chips. He framed the entire thing as proof that Chinese technology had reached new heights. That is not the language of a country that thinks it is losing. Then came January 2025. A Chinese company nobody outside the industry had heard of, DeepSeek, released a model called R1. It didn't just perform well, it performed close to the best American models at a fraction of the cost, using chips that were supposed to be deliberately limited. Silicon Valley didn't just notice, Silicon Valley panicked. Stock prices moved, congressional hearings got scheduled, executives who had spent years saying America's lead was safe suddenly weren't saying that anymore. Sam Altman himself sat in front of a Senate committee and admitted America's lead over China was barely ahead in a race everyone assumed the US was winning by miles. Picture that room for a second. The CEO of the company that arguably started this entire AI boom, sitting under fluorescent lights, telling elected officials that the gap they thought was comfortable wasn't. That's not a comfortable thing to admit in public, and he said it anyway. And here's the thing, that wasn't a one-time scare. Fast forward to this year, a different Chinese startup, originally called Zhipu, now going by the name Z.I, released a model called GLM 5.2. People inside American AI labs started calling it another DeepSeek moment. Its own founder came out and said plainly that it's already playing in the same league as some of Anthropic's most advanced systems, and that it's aiming to match Anthropic's next flagship model within about a year. Think about what that means for a second. Every time Washington tightens the chip restrictions, a few months later, another Chinese lab ships something that makes headlines for being almost as good for almost no money. So the official story becomes, we need tighter export controls. We need to close every loophole. We need Congress to act faster than the chip smugglers. And to be fair, that part is real. There have genuinely been loopholes. Chips have genuinely moved through gray markets and shell companies in ways that made lawmakers furious. Just consider how messy the chips rules themselves have gotten this year alone. At one point, the most advanced Nvidia chips were fully blocked from reaching China. Then, under heavy pressure from the chip industry, a slightly weaker version got cleared for sale, on the condition that a cut of the revenue flows back to the US Treasury. Then reports surfaced that an even more advanced chip, one that was never supposed to leave the building, had apparently been reaching Chinese firms anyway, through subsidiaries registered outside China. Congress found out, Congress was furious. The rules got tightened again within weeks. Banned, then allowed, then banned again. If you're having trouble keeping track of that, you're not alone. People whose entire job is tracking these rules have trouble keeping up. That back and forth alone tells you something important. This isn't a clean, solid wall standing between two countries. It's closer to a fence with more holes in it than posts. But here's the question almost nobody in that hearing room is asking out loud. If this is purely a chip story, why does the gap keep narrowing no matter how hard America squeezes? Why does a country with, by some estimates, dramatically weaker chip yields than Nvidia keep producing models that make Silicon Valley nervous? There has to be something else in the equation, something the chip story conveniently leaves out. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's sitting underneath every single data center on the planet, and almost nobody talks about it on the news. That's where we're going next.
The thing hiding in plain sight. Every AI model, GPT, Claude, Gemini, Grok, DeepSeek, GLM, all of them, is just math running on machines. And machines need power. Not metaphorical power, not power as in influence, actual electricity. The same stuff that runs your refrigerator, your air conditioner, your phone charger, except at a scale that's almost impossible to imagine. A single modern data center can use as much electricity as 100,000 homes. The newest, biggest ones, the ones being built right now for the next generation of AI, can draw as much power as 2 million homes. 2 million homes for one building. Now, here's where the story stops being about who has the smartest engineers and starts being about something much older, much less glamorous, and much harder to fake. Who can actually generate and deliver that much electricity to the right place fast enough? And this is where America has a problem nobody wants to say out loud on cable news. Morgan Stanley, one of the biggest banks in the world, has estimated that US data centers could face a shortfall of 44 gigawatts of electricity within the next 3 years. 44 gigawatts is not a small number. That's roughly enough to power tens of millions of homes. Just missing, just not there when the industry needs it. And this isn't just an American headache, it's global, and it's accelerating faster than almost anyone predicted. The International Energy Agency estimates that electricity used by data centers worldwide is on pace to roughly double this decade, and the AI-focused ones specifically are growing even faster than that, on track to triple. Behind those numbers sits an even bigger one. The 5 biggest American tech companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet, Meta, and Oracle, are expected to spend somewhere between $600 and $700 billion this year alone on data center build-out. Most of that money is going straight into AI infrastructure. $600 billion in 1 year from 5 companies. That capital has to land somewhere. It has to plug into something. And increasingly, the thing it's struggling to plug into is a power grid that simply wasn't built for this. Meanwhile, over in China, something very different is happening. In 1 year, just one, China added new electricity generating capacity equal to roughly 40% of the entire American power grid. Say that number to yourself again, slowly. 40% of the whole American grid added in China in a single year. There's a quote going around from an AI researcher who recently toured China's AI hubs. She said something that stuck with a lot of people in the industry. In America, when engineers plan a new data center, energy is the thing they worry about most. Permits, power lines, years of waiting.
In China, she said, it's treated as a solved problem, something you don't even have to think about anymore. Let that land for a second. While American companies wait years, sometimes into the next decade, just to get a new data center connected to the power grid, China is treating electricity access the way we treat running water. You don't ask if it'll be there, you just build. So how did China get here? Part of it is scale. Part of it is decades of aggressive investment in every kind of power generation: coal, hydro, nuclear, and increasingly solar and wind, built at a speed that would take years of hearings and lawsuits in most American states. Here's the part that stings a little. For roughly 2 decades, American electricity demand was flat, barely moved, so the country simply stopped practicing the basic muscle of building new power plants and new transmission lines at scale. Energy analysts have started calling it exactly that: lost muscle memory. The permits still take years, the transmission lines still take years, except now suddenly the demand is exploding and the muscle to build fast just isn't there anymore. China never stopped exercising that muscle, and it's already showing up in ordinary people's mailboxes, not just industry reports. In parts of Ohio, homeowners have watched their electricity bills climb by more than $1 a day this summer alone, and local reporting has tied a real chunk of that increase directly to nearby data centers pulling power off the same grid. That's not an abstract policy debate anymore. That's somebody's air conditioning bill. Take one example from the other side of the Pacific. Earlier this year, a state-owned Chinese energy company switched on a 500-megawatt solar farm built specifically, not generally, specifically to feed a cluster of data centers in a region called Ningxia. More wind power is coming right behind it. And under new rules from Beijing, any new data center built in China's major computing hubs now has to get at least 80% of its power from renewable sources. That's not a suggestion, that's policy. Enforced. Meanwhile, in the United States, the conversation is still mostly about permits, environmental reviews, and grid interconnection queues that can stretch on for years before a single watt gets delivered. So let's go back to the question from the end of the last section. Why does China keep closing the gap no matter how tightly America restricts chip exports? Here's the honest answer. Because a slightly weaker chip running on abundant, reliable power can still outproduce a slightly better chip that spends half its time waiting for the grid to catch up. Silicon and algorithms get you into the race, but electricity dictates how far you can actually run. Right now, computing power isn't the only bottleneck. Power generation has become just as critical. And that single fact expands the entire narrative you've been fed for the last 3 years. This isn't only a race to build the smartest machine, it's a race to see who can actually keep those massive systems running at scale without the grid collapsing. Stick with me because the numbers behind this get even more staggering. Let's put real numbers on this, because the scale of it is honestly hard to process the first time you hear it. Goldman Sachs, one of the most influential banks on the planet, published a report on exactly this problem. Right now, data centers already eat up about 6% of all the electricity used in the United States. By the end of this decade, that number is expected to almost double, close to 11% of the entire country's electricity just for data centers. And here's the part that should worry you a little more than the growth number itself. 5 years ago, America's power grid had a spare capacity cushion of about 26% during peak summer demand. Room to breathe, room for surprises. Today, that cushion has shrunk to around 19%. And if AI keeps growing at its current pace, Goldman's own analysts warn it could fall below what they call the critically tight level, somewhere around 15% before the decade is even over. Picture a swimming pool that used to have plenty of extra water in it for emergencies. Every year, that extra water gets a little lower. Nobody drained the pool on purpose. Demand just kept rising faster than anyone expected, and the country never rebuilt the systems that would refill it fast enough. Now, to be fair, America still leads in one very real way. The US currently controls about 44% of the entire world's data center capacity. That's roughly as much as China, the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and India combined. That's not nothing. That's a genuine advantage. But it's an advantage that's shrinking, not holding steady. China's own data center footprint has been expanding by roughly 30% a year for most of the last decade. That's not a typo either. 30% compounding year after year. A lead like America's can look enormous right up until the moment the other side has been growing 3 times faster for a decade straight. And this is where the size of the money involved gets almost absurd. McKinsey estimates that globally, somewhere around $6.7 trillion will need to be invested into new data center capacity between now and 2030 just to keep pace with AI demand. $6.7 trillion. That's not a typo, and it's not a small research firm making a wild guess. That's one of the most respected consulting firms in the world looking at the numbers and concluding that this is the scale of investment the moment requires. Some analysts on Wall Street are even starting to ask a much scarier question in private. What happens to the stock market if all of this data center spending turns out to be a one-time building boom, rather than something that keeps paying off forever? At least one major research firm has already floated the idea that this capital spending wave could set up a real correction in the broader stock market, precisely because so much of recent growth has been propped up by this single, narrow bet. That's a conversation for another video, but it tells you how seriously serious money is taking this energy problem. Here on the ground, the effects are already visible in ordinary communities, not just spreadsheets. Companies are adapting in ways that would have sounded almost insane 5 years ago. Some tech giants are no longer even waiting for the public power grid to catch up. They're building their own power plants, literally generating their own electricity right next to their own data centers, because waiting in line behind everyone else on the public grid simply takes too long. Think about what that says. The companies with the deepest pockets on Earth have concluded it's faster to build their own power stations from scratch than to wait for the existing system to catch up. And in towns near these new facilities, residents are the ones absorbing the side effects: rising utility bills, strained local grids, and city councils suddenly fielding questions they were never trained to answer about industrial-scale power demand. That's not a chip story, that's an infrastructure story, playing out in real neighborhoods with real electric bills attached. And infrastructure stories are slow, unglamorous, and incredibly easy to ignore, right up until the moment they decide who wins. All right, quick pause, because I want to say something directly to you. If this is connecting some dots for you that the headlines usually keep separate, that's exactly why this channel exists, to take these massive, fast-moving stories and actually make them make sense. So if you're finding this useful, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and come back every day, because we break down stories like this one all the time. All right, back to it. Because here's where things get genuinely strange. The government just launched something it hasn't attempted since the height of the Cold War, a national mobilization plan that one official openly compared to the Manhattan Project. And while it works alongside chip policy, its real focus is fixing the massive energy shortfall we just spent the last few minutes laying out. Let's break down what America is actually doing about this.
Late last year, President Trump signed an executive order with a name straight out of a science fiction movie, the Genesis mission. And when the Secretary of Energy talked about it publicly, he didn't compare it to a normal government program. He compared it to the Manhattan Project, the effort that built the atomic bomb, and to the Apollo program, the one that put astronauts on the moon. Those aren't small comparisons. Those are the 2 biggest, most urgent national mobilizations in modern American history. So what exactly is this mission trying to do? On paper, the goal sounds almost boring. Double the productivity of American science and engineering within a decade using artificial intelligence. But consider what it's actually built around, because this is where it gets interesting. The Genesis mission is organized around 6 priority areas: advanced manufacturing, biotechnology, critical materials, quantum information science, semiconductors, and nuclear energy. Say that last one again in your head. Nuclear energy, sitting right there as one of 6 national priorities for winning the AI race. Not as a side project, not as an afterthought buried on page 40 of some policy document, as one of the 6 pillars the government considers essential to actually staying ahead. That single fact tells you everything about what Washington now understands, even if most of the public conversation hasn't caught up yet. The people actually running this effort know the real fight isn't only about who has the smartest model, it's about who can generate enough raw power to keep training the next one, and the one after that. Here's how the plan is supposed to work. The Department of Energy is being told to open up its national laboratories, 17 of them, packed with some of the most powerful supercomputers on the planet, and turn them into a shared platform that private companies, universities, and government researchers can all tap into. Think of it like a national engine room, one that combines America's most sensitive scientific data, its most powerful computers, and its top researchers into a single system built specifically to accelerate discovery. Officials have given it a formal name, the American Science and Security Platform, and the intent is for it to stay usable no matter which company builds the AI models running on top of it.
The person put in charge of actually running the Department of Energy side of this is Secretary Chris Wright, working alongside a scientist named Dario Gil. And the nuclear piece isn't just a line item on a policy document either. The same administration pushing this mission forward has also been fast-tracking new reactor approvals and reviving nuclear plants that have been sitting mothballed for years. Plants that until very recently nobody expected to ever generate electricity again. That's a very different kind of urgency than let's write another regulation about chip exports. And this isn't just a plan sitting in a drawer somewhere. There's an actual timeline, actual deadlines with actual dates attached. Identify at least 20 major science and technology challenges worth tackling, inventory every computing resource across the federal government, build out the actual data sets, and by roughly the end of next month, demonstrate that this whole system can actually produce a working result on at least one major scientific challenge. Dozens of organizations have already signed formal agreements to take part. Now, here's the part that connects everything we've talked about so far. This entire initiative builds directly on top of something called America's AI Action Plan, a roadmap the administration released specifically to remove barriers to building AI infrastructure at home and to reduce America's dependence on foreign supply chains for the pieces of the puzzle it can't fully control. Unpack that phrase for a second. Remove barriers to building AI infrastructure at home. That's government language for exactly the problem we spent the last two sections on. Permits, power lines, grid connections, years of waiting. The Genesis mission is, in large part, Washington finally admitting out loud that chips were never the only battlefield. Energy, manufacturing capacity, and raw industrial muscle are just as much a part of this fight, maybe even more. So America is not sitting still, let's be completely fair about that. There is a real, well-funded Manhattan Project-size effort underway to rebuild the industrial foundation this technology actually depends on. But rebuilding a national power grid, restarting nuclear projects, and untangling decades of permitting bureaucracy, that doesn't happen on the same timeline as releasing a new chatbot update. Chips can ship in weeks. Power plants take years, sometimes a decade. It's the difference between updating an app and pouring the foundation for a new building. One happens overnight, the other happens brick by brick, permit by permit, year by year, no matter how much money you throw at it. And while all of this long, slow, unglamorous infrastructure work grinds forward, there's still a very fast, very messy fight happening on the chip side of things. One that keeps flip-flopping in ways that would confuse even the people writing the rules. Let's go back to that battlefield for a moment, because the twists there get even stranger. So let's rejoin the chip fight, because this year alone, it has been an absolute roller coaster. In December of last year, President Trump made an announcement that surprised a lot of people who thought this administration would only get tougher on China. He said Nvidia could start selling its H200 chip, a genuinely powerful piece of hardware, its second most advanced at the time, to approved buyers in China. As part of the deal, a quarter of the revenue from those sales would flow directly back to the US Treasury. Think about that for a second. The same government restricting chip sales for national security reasons also agreed to take a cut of the ones it allowed through. Why would an administration that talks tough on China suddenly open that door? Here's the argument Nvidia's own CEO, Jensen Huang, has been making for years, and is actually a clever one, whether or not you agree with it. If American chips get locked out of China completely, Chinese developers won't just sit around waiting. They'll build their entire AI ecosystem on Chinese hardware instead. Companies like Huawei, with their own chips, their own software, their own standards. And once half the world's AI developers get comfortable building on that Chinese stack, they may never come back, no matter how good American chips get afterward. In other words, better to keep China a little bit dependent on American technology than to hand them a reason to build their own completely independent system. That's the strategic bet. Before these restrictions started, China made up something like 13% of Nvidia's total revenue, and as much as 95% of the entire Chinese market for advanced AI chips ran through Nvidia specifically. That's an enormous business relationship to just walk away from. And yet, by this spring, Nvidia's own CEO was telling investors to expect essentially nothing from China sales going forward. A remarkable admission from the head of the company that, until recently, dominated that market almost completely. But almost immediately, this looser approach ran into trouble. Reports surfaced that Nvidia's most advanced chip line, the Blackwell series, which was never supposed to reach China at all, had apparently been flowing to Chinese firms anyway through subsidiaries registered outside the country. Industry estimates suggest hundreds of thousands of these chips may have moved through that gap over roughly a year before regulators caught up. In May, the Commerce Department issued new guidance closing that loophole, saying license requirements now apply to any company whose parent is headquartered in China, no matter where its buying office happens to sit. Congress was not happy. Lawmakers from both parties said letting even a scaled-down version of these chips through could meaningfully shrink America's compute advantage. Some analyses have gone even further, warning that allowing a toned-down Blackwell chip into China could shrink America's compute lead from something like 30 times over, down to as little as 4 times over. 30 times down to 4 times. That's the kind of number that gets bipartisan lawmakers who agree on almost nothing suddenly agreeing on something. And here's a genuinely strange twist in all of this.
A Congress official testified to Congress in July that actual H200 shipments to China have been, in his own words, trivial, despite roughly $10 billion in licenses already approved. So even after Washington opened the door, barely anyone walked through it. Why would that be? Partly, it's because Beijing has its own reasons to be cautious about American chips. Chinese regulators have raised security concerns about some approved American chips and have pushed some domestic companies to favor homegrown alternatives instead, even when the American option might technically perform better. Meanwhile, China's own chip industry keeps grinding forward, imperfectly but persistently. Huawei, China's leading domestic chipmaker, is reportedly producing chips with something like 5 to 20% manufacturing yield. Compare that to Nvidia's estimated 60 to 80% yield on its current generation. One semiconductor analyst put it simply, on a chip-by-chip basis, Huawei has essentially caught up to roughly where Nvidia stood about 3 years ago. That's real progress. It's also, in a way, running on a treadmill, because Huawei's own roadmap toward truly matching Nvidia's newest chips depends on Chinese manufacturing catching up to a level that American export controls are specifically designed to prevent. So, here's where all of this leaves us. 2 administrations, 2 sets of policies. Chips banned, then allowed, then partially banned again. A country racing to build its own chips despite yields that lag years behind. A revenue-sharing deal that barely moved any actual hardware. If your head is spinning trying to track all of it, that's honestly the correct reaction. Even the experts writing the rules can barely keep pace with their own policy. But step back from the chaos for a second, and one thing becomes clear. Chips are still part of this story. They matter. Nobody's arguing otherwise. But they are the slow-moving, endlessly negotiated part of the story. The part everyone's watching precisely because it's dramatic, full of scandal, full of congressional hearings and CEO testimony. Meanwhile, the energy story keeps compounding quietly in the background without a single dramatic headline attached to it. And that raises a bigger question than who has the better GPU. It's the question of who actually gets to decide how the rest of the world builds its future on top of all this. That's where we're headed next. So let's zoom all the way out, because everything we've covered so far builds toward one bigger idea. A well-known consulting firm published an analysis this year with a phrase that's been sticking with a lot of people who study this closely. They called it the Great Divide. Here's the idea behind it.
The United States and China aren't just competing to build the best AI anymore. They're each building an entire technology stack. Chips, software, cloud infrastructure, safety rules, everything specifically designed to reduce how much they depend on the other. Which means the world isn't heading toward one shared AI future. It's heading toward two. Two incompatible systems, two different sets of rules, two different foundations that everything else gets built on top of. And here's the part that actually affects you whether you ever open an AI chatbot or not. Every other country on Earth is eventually going to have to choose which one of these two stacks to build their own future on top of. Their hospitals, their power grids, their banks, their militaries, their government services. Think about what that really means. Whoever stack the rest of the world adopts doesn't just sell more chips or more software subscriptions. They end up setting the default rules everyone else lives inside of. Default privacy standards, default safety standards, default assumptions about who gets access to what data and who doesn't. This is starting to look a lot less like a tech competition and a lot more like the 20th century fight over which currency the whole world would trade in, or whose electrical outlets and rail gauges other countries would standardize around once they built out their own infrastructure. Whoever wins doesn't just win bragging rights, they win the plumbing everyone else quietly depends on for decades. There's another underreported piece of this worth pausing on. Groups aligned with some of the biggest American AI labs have become serious spenders in domestic political campaigns, essentially extending their corporate rivalry into the voting booth. Whatever you think about any specific policy position, the fact itself is new and strange. The companies building this technology aren't just competing in the market anymore. They're competing to shape the politicians who write the rules the whole industry has to live under. That's not something that shows up in a chip race headline, but it's very much part of how this competition is actually being fought. And here's where China's strategy gets genuinely clever. Models like DeepSeek's R1 were released openly, meaning any developer in any country could download the underlying model and build on top of it for free, with no American company and no American rules anywhere in the chain. For a smaller country that can't afford billion-dollar AI contracts with Silicon Valley, that free, open alternative is enormously tempting. Quietly, without a single dramatic headline, that's how influence spreads. Not through a treaty, not through a summit, through a free download that a government ministry somewhere decides is good enough to build their entire digital infrastructure on top of. Now, a serious congressional research report on this exact competition made an observation that's easy to miss in all the noise. America and China aren't actually running the same race with different amounts of money. They're running two different races on two completely different clocks. The chip fight moves in weeks and months. New rule, new workaround, new headline, repeat. The energy fight moves in years and decades. Power plants, transmission lines, nuclear reactors, none of that responds to a press release. And that's precisely why the chip story dominates the news while the energy story barely gets mentioned. One produces headlines every single week, the other produces results so slowly that most people never connect the dots. So here's what this actually means for you sitting at home watching all this play out. It means the price on your electric bill isn't random. It's connected to a data center a few counties over, feeding a race most of your neighbors have never heard the real story behind. It means the job market is quietly shifting underneath everyone's feet toward electricians, welders, grid engineers, and nuclear technicians, not just software developers in hoodies. Somewhere in America right now, a kid deciding what to study in trade school is making a more strategically important career choice than half the executives testifying in front of Congress about chip policy. They just don't know it yet. It means the country that keeps its lights on, more than the country with the flashiest chatbot demo, ends up writing the rules the rest of the world lives by for the next several decades. And it means the real winner of this race won't necessarily be whoever has the smartest AI on the day the finish line gets crossed. It'll be whoever can keep building power plants, chip factories, transmission lines, everything longer than the other side can. Not the smartest, the most durable. That's a very different definition of winning than the one most headlines are selling you. And once you see the race that way, it's almost impossible to go back to thinking about this as a simple story about who has the better robot brain. So let's bring this all the way home. let's go back to where we started. At the top of this video, I told you this wasn't only a race to build a smarter chatbot, but a race to power the infrastructure behind it. By now, you understand why. The chip restrictions, the hardware breakthroughs, the AI leaderboards, all of that is essential, but it sits directly on top of something quieter, heavier, and harder to fake. Electricity, concrete, permits, transmission lines, nuclear reactors. It was never a choice between chips or energy. It was always about both. The intelligence of the machine and the physical power required to unleash it. Here's something worth sitting with. Empires throughout history were rarely remembered for their single cleverest idea. They were remembered for their roads, their aqueducts, their ability to move water, grain, and power to exactly where it needed to be at the exact moment it was needed, year after year, without anyone in the capital having to think twice about it in the capital. Rome didn't outlast half of Europe because it had the cleverest philosophers of its time. It outlasted them because water kept flowing into its cities through stone channels built to last centuries, long after the emperors who ordered them built were forgotten. America's own rise in the last century followed the same quiet pattern. An interstate highway system nobody gets excited about anymore. A power grid built out decade after decade without much fanfare. None of it made for thrilling television. All of it is the reason the 20th century ended up being called the American century. The flashy invention gets the headline. The boring infrastructure underneath it decides who actually gets to keep using that invention 20 years from now. That's what's happening right now, in real time, whether cable news frames it that way or not. So no, this isn't really about who built the smarter model this quarter. It's about which country can keep building, quietly, patiently, unglamorously, for longer than the other one. Power plants instead of press releases, grid connections instead of leaderboard rankings. And somewhere in a small town in Ohio or Texas or a village outside Ningxia, a lineman is climbing a pole or an engineer is switching on a substation, having no idea that what they're doing that morning is more decisive to the outcome of this entire competition than almost anything said in a Senate hearing room. They'll never be interviewed about it. They'll never trend. They're not thinking about artificial intelligence at all. They're thinking about torque specs or a breaker panel or getting home in time for dinner. But they're the ones actually writing the outcome of the story you just spent the last 40 minutes learning the real version of. Meanwhile, somewhere in Washington and somewhere in Beijing, people in much nicer suits are giving speeches about intelligence, about models, about who's ahead this quarter. They're not lying exactly, they're just talking about the part of the story that fits on camera. Think about that the next time someone tells you this is simply a story about robots getting smarter. It never was. It's a story about wires, about permits, about whether a nation still remembers how to build the unglamorous things that make everything else possible. And whichever country remembers that best, quietly wins everything else that comes after it. So here's something practical to carry with you after this video ends. The next time you see a headline about a new chip ban or a new export rule or some Chinese model shaking up a leaderboard, notice it, sure, but hold your real attention for the quieter stories. A nuclear plant getting approved for restart in a town you've never heard of. A utility company quietly asking regulators for permission to raise rates because of new industrial demand nearby. A power line project that's been stuck in permitting for 3 years suddenly getting fast-tracked. Those are the headlines that actually tell you who's winning this race, not the leaderboard, not the CEO testimony, the concrete, the copper wire, and the permits. Remember the opening of this video. I told you America wasn't just racing China to build a smarter chatbot, but to secure the energy grid that makes it all possible. Everything in between was the proof. The chip bans that flip-flopped within weeks, the Genesis mission rebuilding the industrial foundation, the solar farms in Ningxia, the electric bill in Ohio. It was never strictly about intelligence or strictly about power grid capacity. It was always about the critical intersection of both. Now, before you go, if this actually shifted how you think about this whole conversation, if you came in thinking chips and you're leaving thinking something much bigger, that's exactly what this channel is here for. We take stories like this one, the ones buried under 100 confusing headlines, and we pull out the actual thread connecting all of it. So here's what I'd ask of you. Follow the channel so you don't miss the next one of these. And if you know 5 people who still think this whole AI race comes down to who has the fastest chip, send this to them, not because it makes you look smart, because it's genuinely one of those things that changes how you see the news for the rest of the year. I'd also love an honest comment from you, not a polite one, an honest one. Tell me what actually surprised you in this video. Tell me if I got something wrong or oversimplified a piece of it. And one more thing, tell me what you want broken down next. Is it the AI job story, what actually happens to your career over the next 5 years? Is it the nuclear energy comeback happening quietly across the country right now? Is it what's really going on inside these Chinese AI labs everyone keeps mentioning but nobody actually explains? Whatever it is, put it in the comments. This channel exists because of exactly that kind of conversation. I'll see you in the next one.